Hello everyone, we are still with language acquisition and theme 6. This is part 4. In this part 4, we are going to move to a second theory to language acquisition, that is the cognitive approach. Very shortly, in this, in this presentation, in part 4 of language acquisition, we are going to talk about the background of the cognitive approach and its main basic assumptions. Just to remind you, in the previous, presentations, parts of language acquisition, we have talked about the behavioral approach. Certainly, there are two main approaches to language acquisition. The two main, they are not the only approaches, because right after the cognitive approach, there appeared other, theories or approaches to language acquisition. But we are talking about the very common approaches to language acquisition, the most common approaches, which are the behavioral approach and the cognitive approach. In the previous presentations, we explained the basics and background, basics, implications, and even limitations of the behavioral approach. In this second approach, that is the cognitive, we try to give you some insights, some information about the cognitive approach. The cognitive approach came as a reaction to behaviorism in the second half of the 20th century. In reaction to behaviorism, cognitivists regarded people as programmed animals that simply respond to environmental stimuli. Rather, they viewed people as rational beings that acquire active participation in order to acquire language. For cognitivists and cognitivism, focus was on the inner mental processes, capacities. For cognitivists, what occurs in a person's mind, the black box, is necessary to understand people's behaviors. This approach to psychology emphasizes that cognition is a faculty for the processing of information, knowledge, and changing preferences. What all these means? We can summarize these ideas in few words. Cognitivism, we said, reacted against behaviorism. Why reacted? Simply because cognitivism said that we cannot overlook what behaviorists said. They said, they believed in eliminating, overlooking the mental mechanisms, the cognitive processes. So cognitivists said, we cannot exclude, we cannot eschew, neglect, eliminate, overlook the mental capacities, mental abilities, the cognitive ability, thinking, aptitude, intelligence, motivation, feelings, emotions, all these affective and not only affective processes, even mental process, emotional process, they are present with us when we come to acquire our first language. We cannot eliminate them. So cognitivism gave importance to the mind, to what they call, behaviorists, the mind, they called it the black box. The black box. Cognitivists considered the role of the mind. Language is not a mere application of the processes that are presented and suggested by conditioning. There is something more conditioning in the mind, and that helps us, we humans, enable us to produce language. This is the main idea. So that's why we say usually that cognitive approach came as a reaction to behaviorism, simply because it has given cognitivism importance to the mind, the mental processes, cognitive processes, mental mechanisms, cognitive mechanisms, mental, capacities, cognitive capacities. Now let's look at some basic assumptions of cognitivism. Cognitivists assume that behavior is the result of information processing, not conditioning. By describing thinking as information processing, cognitives make a comparison between minds and computers. So the process of language acquisition is like, in relation to cognitivism, is like computer, input, processing, output. Central to the cognitive process, the idea that people are actively present and try to make sense of their environment by imposing order and meaning on the things they encounter. In precise terms, this is what we explained before. We people are active participants. We make use of our mind. We make use of our mental capacities. We use our mental mechanisms to acquire language. It's not a matter of just exposure to the environment. Cognitivists explain this process in terms of schemes-driven processing. Schemes, what are schemes? They are ways of organizing knowledge and experiences of the world into generic templates. Templates in our minds, of course, that are used to make sense of objects, situations, and the people we encounter. In doing so, cognitivists try to build models of the information processing that goes inside people's minds. So here we talk about making use of mental schematas, mental models of information. Again, here what we mean by this, we simply mean that we people actively make use of our mental processes. The role of the mind is very important for cognitivists as opposed to behaviorists. And this is all about this presentation. Thank you very much indeed.